Hi friends! Welcome to this week's math video. Today we're going to be covering a geometry topic all about lines. SOL 4.10 A and B says the student will identify and describe representations of points, lines, line segments, rays, and angles, including endpoints and vertices. These are all things you should be able to recognize when you see it and describe it with words. And then you're also going to be able to identify representations of lines that illustrate intersection, parallelism, and perpendicularity. So let's just go ahead and jump right in. So the first word that you need to be able to recognize and describe is a point. So a point is an exact location in space. It has no length or width. Points have names and they're represented with a capital letter. So for example, this point right here, you could say is point A. So here we have a picture of three different points. Here's point A, here's point B, and here's point C. And pretend they're just kind of floating out there in space. Okay, so pretty simple for points. Next, we have a line. Now a line is a collection of points. So you take a few of those points all together and they will form a line. And a line goes on infinitely in both directions. So on and on. It has no end points. Okay, so it is a straight line that continues forever. And it can go vertically, horizontally, or obliquely, or another word is diagonally. It doesn't matter which direction it goes, but you'll know it is a line because it has arrows on the ends. That's how you're going to be able to recognize it. It is also named by two of the points that it goes through. So this line is a collection of these 2 points, A and B. And so when you go to name it like in a sentence, you would actually write the 2 points and then put a little line above it with the arrows. So this would be read as line AB. So let's take a look at our points in space and how I've created lines that go with them. Ooh, okay, so here is line AC, and you know that because there's 2 points, AC, that go right through it. Now this one is line, do you know? BC, because this line goes right through it. And look at the ends of these lines. There's arrows. So that's how you know how to say it correctly. That is called a line. All right? Okay. So remember that a line goes on and on in both directions. So if you can imagine little people running in both directions and they never get tired and they never stop, just like Mrs. Kleffman. Okay, so now we have a little tiny quiz. True or false? A line has an arrow on both ends and continues forever in both directions. What do you think? True or false? A line has no endpoints. True or false? A line must be straight. All right, now we're going to head on over to a line segment. Well, it's important to notice that a line segment is part of a line, but this line segment has 2 endpoints, and they look like this. At the very ends of it are 2 points. And the line segment includes all the points in between those endpoints. And this is also a straight line, but this time it's a straight line that stops. It can be vertical, horizontal, or diagonal, same thing. This time it's identified by the points at the ends. So you would call a line segment like this one, line segment AD. Only at the top you just put one line across it. You don't have to put the little points. This is when you're naming it and writing it like a sentence. So let's take a look at our lines, and we're going to zoom in to line segment AC. Okay, so if we just zoom in on that part, you're going to notice that a line segment is part of a line. You can see the line here. But when we're talking about a specific line segment, we're going to zoom in to just this part, and we're only referring to this part. And you see how they have a point at both ends. And those points, since they're at the ends, are called endpoints. Here's another one. This one is line segment BC. So we can zoom into this one. Line segment BC. Line segment BC is a part of line BC. But when we talk about line segment BC, we are only talking about this part right here. Okay, so a line segment has two endpoints. Remember the line, how it had two arrows and these little guys were running super fast in both directions? Well, now they have these endpoints and they're like little stop signs. That's it. They have to stay on this line. They can't go anywhere else because this is the only part of the line that we're talking about. So it's important to know that when you have a line segment, it has two endpoints. No running. All right, so now a little quiz. True or false? A line segment is part of a line. True or false? A line segment has two endpoints. All right, friends, we're going to move on to the next word called array. Array is also part of a line, but array has one endpoint, and then it continues on and on in one direction. So it's kind of a combination of a line and a line segment. So look here, we have an arrow on one side and then an endpoint on the other. That is array. I always think of it because it kind of looks like an arrow or a ray gun or something. So array is a straight line that stops on one end and keeps going on the other. It can also be either vertical, horizontal, or diagonal. It is identified by any point and then the end point. So you have to say this end point, and then you could say either of these in the name. So you could say this is ray AC, or you could say this is ray AB. It represents the same thing. But the very first point that you're talking about needs to be the end point. Okay, so let's go back to our lines and take a look. So a ray is also a part of a line. So this ray is called ray, do you know? BC. Okay, so if we zoom into this one, we will see that this is part of a line. But when we are talking about the ray, we have to just talk about from this endpoint on and on forever in this direction. So if we're talking about line BC, we're talking about the whole thing. But if we're talking about ray BC, we have to start at B and go the rest. We have to ignore every other part of the line. Okay, so the important thing to remember about array is that it goes on and on in one direction. So you get to run as fast as you can in one direction, but then you have to stop in this direction. Okay? But it could be flipped around. So the end point could be over here and the arrow could be over here, but you have one of each. So on one side, you get to run, and the other you have to stop. All right, so true or false? A ray has one endpoint and one arrow. It goes forever in only one direction. True or false? A ray is part of a line. Okay, so now is when it gets good, because as you are noticing in geometry, everything builds on itself. So what we're doing, we started with points, then we started with lines, now we're zooming into rays, and when you put two rays together, it makes an angle, which is really, hello, the beginning of geometrical shapes. So it's pretty neat how it all fits together. So two rays that have the same endpoint form an angle, and this endpoint is called the vertex. So angles are found wherever lines and line segments intersect. So really what you don't see is that this line continues forever, but we're just zooming in on this ray, ray AC, and this line continues forever and ever, but you can't see that because we're zooming in on the ray AB. And they both share that endpoint of A, so it becomes an angle. So an angle can be named in three different ways. So you can use the three letters to the name. So angle BAC, a point on one ray, the vertex, and then a point on the other ray. So if you remember, A was the end point for both of those. You take a point from here, you say the end point, and then you say this point. So you could say this is angle BAC or angle CAB. Either way would work. Another way to name an angle is to say the name of the endpoint or the vertex. So it would be angle A. And then another way that you sometimes name an angle is they put a little number in there, and so you would just say angle 1 if they have a number for you to look at. Angle A or angle 1, and it's all representing the same thing. It depends on how they write it on a page. So let's take a look at our lines and find the angle. So here is ray CA, and then we're going to look at how ray CB shares this endpoint, and now it becomes an angle. So this could be called angle ACB or angle BCA, or you could say angle C. So just remember that this shared endpoint has a special name of its own, and that's called a vertex. So that's important to know. Since they share that endpoint, it's called a vertex. So now next year you're going to learn a lot more about angles because there's three different kinds. There's if it's straight up and down like this, like a square, that's called a right angle. That means it has a 90-degree opening. And if it's less than 90 degrees, if it's smaller, like more closed, that's called an acute angle. And if it's open wider, that's called an obtuse angle. But for 4th grade, they just really want you to be able to recognize right angles, that they're 90 degrees, and they're usually represented with a little square here. It would show you a little square. Okay, so we're going to try to recognize some of these things that we have learned so far. So my first question is, how many lines do you see in this figure? Look carefully. There is one line. See how it has two arrows? That's one line. Okay, my next question, how many rays do you see? There are 1, 2, 3, 4 rays. Did you get that right? How many line segments do you see? Well, there's only one, so that's not too bad. All right, so now we're going to do a little matching. I'm going to show you a picture, and you're going to match it. Is it an angle, a line segment, a line, a point, or a ray? What is this showing? What is this showing? What is this showing? What is this showing? And finally, what one is this? So now we have learned a lot about lines, but there are also 3 special names for the different types of lines. So one special name that you need to know is intersecting lines. And quite simply, it's lines that cross. And they have one point in common. Remember that lines have to be straight. And if 2 lines cross, then they are called intersecting lines. Okay, so you can see in this picture that line AC intersects line DE at point B. Okay, they just cross, basically. Just remember that. Okay, so perpendicular lines are a special kind of intersecting lines because when they cross, they form that right angle like I showed you. They'll show you this little square, which means this is a 90-degree opening, and that means that these are called perpendicular lines. They're intersecting lines, but they're special intersecting lines because they form that 90-degree angle. Okay, and then the final type of lines that you need to know are parallel lines. So just think about like railroad tracks, where those 2 things would never ever cross. They just go straight side by side together. So parallel lines are lines that lie on the same flat surface and never cross. Parallel lines are always the same distance apart and do not share any points. So you could say this picture, line AB is parallel to line CD. All right, so go ahead and try to name these types of lines. Now you may remember this topic from 3rd grade because it was a 3rd grade SOL. 3rd grade SOL says that you're supposed to identify and draw representations of these things that we talked about today. But if you notice the difference when they jump to 4th grade, you not only need to identify them, you have to be able to describe them with words, and that gets a little bit tricky. Okay, so you really have to fully understand. It just demonstrates that you have a deeper understanding of what these objects are. So you may see a question like this on the SOL. This was an example, and it was such an important example that Virginia decided to show the teachers because they're like, this is the type of question that your students are getting wrong. So this question says, select 3 statements about a ray that are true. Because we need to be able to practice verbal descriptions of these things, not just looking at pictures anymore. Now we need to be able to look at the words and point it out. So these 3 sentences are true about a ray. A ray has exactly one endpoint. A ray goes on infinitely in one direction. And a ray is part of a line. So you have to pick out which ones are true and which ones are not true, because a ray does not have 2 endpoints. That's a line segment. A ray does not go on and on infinitely in 2 directions, because that's a line. An array is not part of a line segment, it's part of a line. Because remember, a line segment doesn't have an arrow, but a ray does. So we need to be able to look at verbal descriptions and connect those to those vocabulary words. So now we're going to do a little activity. These are our words that you need to know. And here's some verbal descriptions. So I'm going to put some questions in our video and see if you can pick out the correct statements for each vocabulary word. All right, friends, I'm going to be sending 2 games to you in your email. This one is a matching game, and this one is also another matching game, but a different type. So for this activity here, what you're going to do is cut everything out. And for this one, you're not going to need any glue. Okay, so you are going to be able to cut these squares out and just put them in an envelope, and then that way you can play a matching game whenever you would like to review. So you could do it in a lot of different ways. You could just have them all spread out and try to find the matches. You could possibly play like a memory game and try to find matches that way, but it contains all the words and all the verbal descriptions and pictures that you need to know for 4th grade. The other activity is also where you're going to cut out, but I would suggest not gluing. That way you could do this more than once. So I would suggest after you cut these out, then you can match them to the correct word. Down here you can physically write with a pencil. How do you know that these are all lines? How do you know these are all line segments? That kind of thing. And then when you're finished, you could just paper clip all of your little squares to your piece of paper. That way it's an activity that you could do more than once. All right, friends. What matters most is how you see yourself. So we need to be always noticing what a warrior we are and how strong we are and how skilled we are and our potential. Okay? Because whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. So if you have a negative attitude and think, oh, I'm never going to learn this, then you might not ever learn it because you're shutting your brain down. But if you think, oh, I will get this, I will learn this, I will keep practicing, then you better believe you're going to learn and you're going to grow. So see yourself as the awesome student that you are. All right, bye everybody.